Shevuot Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. What we imply is also a statement, מכלל אתה שומע, where we'll learn how not only do we have to be careful about the words we use, but we also have to be careful about the things we imply, even though we haven't actually said them, and we'll understand that in our Gemara. And in so doing, we'll be introduced today to one of the greatest Torah minds of our period, Rabbi Aaron Kotler. I'll tell you a little bit more about him as we get to know him this morning. The Gemara that we're talking about is a person says to another, again, we're talking about Shvuot Hadayanim, Shvuot Ha'idut, so an individual is being subpoenaed. And I come to these two people and I say, I have a case in court, do you know evidence? And you say, you don't know evidence. I then ask you to swear. And if you do, and it turns out that you do have evidence, then you've got to bring a korban. And we're talking about a particular wording of that oath. If I were to say, and to do it almost in the form of a klala, in the form of a curse, if I were to say, Al Yakcha, this is in our Mishnah, Al Yakcha, may Hashem not smite you if you give evidence. V'yevarechecha, I say, may Hashem bless you if you give evidence. V'yitzavrach, may Hashem do good for you if you give evidence. But I haven't said anything about what I want God to do to you if you don't give evidence. I haven't said, and if you don't give evidence, may God smite you. If you don't give evidence, may God not do any good for you. I didn't say that. I just said the one side. Rabbi Meir mechayev v'chachamim potrim. There's a machlokes Rabbi Meir and Chachamim as to whether you're chayev or patur. And the issue is, he implies the curse. And since he implies the curse, is that implication considered a curse and a proper shvuah? So Rabbi Meir says, yes, this is a proper shvuah, this is a proper oath that you've brought God's name into it, there's a curse involved. Ask the Gemara, v'halet leil Rabbi Meir michlal lav ata shomea hen. But that's difficult to understand because we know that Rabbi Meir does not hold of the principle of מכלל לאו אתה שומע hen, which means, we've had it before, מכלל לאו אתה שומע hen means that from the negative you can infer the positive. You don't have to spell it out. You do such and such, then such and such. I understand that the converse is true as well. You don't have to spell out the converse because מכלל לאו אתה שומע hen, from the one statement, you can deduce the other statement. Now, Rabbi Meir holds that we don't use that in interpreting the Torah. We don't use that principle. In that case, if a person says, may God not smite you if you give evidence, there's nothing wrong in that. He's giving him a bracha. He's not making him swear anything. But the Chachamim say, no, there is an implication. The implication is that if you don't give evidence, God will smite you. But Rabbi Meir, we know, holds, we don't say מכלל לאו אתה שומע hen, so why is Rabbi Meir saying here, chayav, that this is valid? So the Gemara goes through, and the Gemara answers, ki letle b'mamona, aval b'yisura itle. The Gemara makes a distinction in Rabbi Meir between mandatory matters and matters of prohibitions. In mandatory matters, he does not hold of the principle that מכלל לאו אתה שומע hen, that you can deduce, you can infer the converse from the actual statement. You go by what the person says and that's it. But if we're talking about Isura, like here we're talking about Shvuat Ha'idut, and although the person's giving evidence about a mandatory matter, the Marashal says, but the actual prohibition here is one of Isurim. You're giving false evidence. That's not a mandatory issue. You're not going to be guilty of anything mandatorily. You'll have to bring a korban. And therefore, in the case of Isur, where we're dealing with prohibitions, not with money, there Rabbi Meir holds that we can infer the one from the other. That if you give the one side, I can infer the converse, you don't have to spell it out. All of this links into the issue of Tanai Kaful, which we learned 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago in Gittin, on Daf Ayin Hey in Gittin. We had a Matmonim on the idea of Tanai Kaful, where Moshe says to the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, who want to stay in Gilad, they want to put up their farms in Gilad, and Moshe says, if you'll come with your brethren, you'll fight and we'll conquer the land, you can stay in Gilad. And if you don't come with the brethren, you will not be able to stay in Gilad. The Gemara says, why does Moshe have to repeat the second part? Can't you just infer? If you say, if you fight for the Bnei Israel, then you'll get Gilad. That means that if you don't, you won't get Gilad. Why does he have to say it? So we see from there that you need a Tanai Kaful, that you've always got to state the condition and the converse of the condition. You've got to be very explicit. We learn from that for matters of Tanaim. The issue that I want to look at with you is why this difference between Isur and Mammon. What's going on here with Rabbi Meir? So there's a simple question. When somebody says something, do we infer the unsaid, or do we require the unsaid to be said? That's an issue. We understand that, and it's in many different places of halakha. Why are we bifurcating Rabbi Meir and saying if it's a matter of isur, if it's a matter of prohibitions, then we infer. But if it's in a matter of mamnus, if we're dealing with money, it has to be set out specifically. So here's where Rabbi Aaron Kotler comes in. It's important when we deal with achronim. Most of the time in the Matmonim, you'll see we deal with rishonim. We deal with primary sources. We deal with the period of the rishonim, sometimes the early and specific achronim. But then there are these very great lights among the achronim. And one of my criticisms of the way Torah is often learnt and taught today is without a deep understanding of the rankings of people. Everybody's not the same. You can't say the Chofetz Chaim says A and Rabbi Cohen down the road says B. And you know what? Not just Rabbi Cohen down the road, but Rabbi Levi up the road also says B, and Rabbi Chaim Shmuelevitz said this, and Rabbi so-and-so said this, so the Chofetz Chaim must be wrong. You can't weigh up numbers like that. Each of these Rishonim, who we don't know as well, but the Achronim, who we know much better, have different ratings. And you don't put them in the same sentence. And you don't just have a source sheet of this one says this, and this one says this, and this one says that, as if they're all one ranking. Each one is a world, and you need to know them personally. You need to really get to know them to understand how much authority do they come with. They all come with an enormous amount of authority because they're all massive Talmidei Chachomim, whose knowledge is so enormous and whose characters are so beyond anything we can understand. But even within that group, there are different levels of Achronim. And Rabbi Aaron Kotler is one of the shining lights. Rabbi Aaron Kotler died in 1962. I was at his funeral, and I'll never ever forget it. I was just after my bar mitzvah. I was learning in yeshiva in Israel, and his body was brought to Yerushalayim for burial. And to see, at that time, the yeshiva world was small. There weren't that many people learning in yeshiva. To see that number of people at a funeral, it's still in front of me today. I'll never forget who was there. The Gedolei Israel were there. The Gedolei Israel from all over the world. And all the yeshiva boys, everybody who was in yeshiva was there. It was just a sight that was something so amazing. Rabbi Aaron started off as a young man. He married the daughter of Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, so that already tells you a whole lot. Rabbi Zalman Meltzer was head and shoulders above the people of his generation. Rabbi Aaron Kotler becomes his son-in-law and teaches in his yeshiva in Slutsk. And then comes the First World War and the Bolshevik uprisings, and Slutsk is under attack, and Rabbi Aaron Kotler just carries on teaching. It reminds us a little bit of today, of the heroes of the period that we're in, people who are out, and we're protected from it to a large degree where we live, but people who in Gaza, who are on the borders, and carry on learning and carry on teaching Torah as the bombs are flying and as the missiles are flying. This level of heroism in Rabbi Aaron Kotler was such. The yeshiva went on, the learning went on, the teaching went on. And at some point, Rabbi Zalman was taken prisoner by the Bolsheviks, and he ran the yeshiva. Later on, when things became untenable, they moved the yeshiva to Kletsk, which was only 70 kilometers away, but it was in a safer area. And there he started a new yeshiva. Rabbi Aaron Kotler started a yeshiva and forged his own approach. It wasn't Reb Shimon, and it wasn't Reb Chaim, and it wasn't Reb Baruch Ber. It was Rabbi Aaron. Rabbi Aaron stood on a level with all of those giants, and he developed his own method in learning of getting to the essence of things, understanding things in the deepest way possible. A derech higayon, we call it, similar to Reb Shimon Shkop in that sense of really going unbelievably deep. And he builds this yeshiva in Sletsk, and then comes the Second World War. And the Nazis come, they move to Vilna for a while. Then that doesn't work, and he goes with the group that went to Kobe in Japan, and from Kobe he gets to the United States in 1941. And soon after that he starts the yeshiva in Lakewood. But one has to understand that at the time that he comes to America, there's no Torah. I mean, there's just little tiny pockets. There's a bit of modern orthodoxy, and there's conservatism, and there's reform, and there's very little Torah. and he sees the potential devastation and loss of Torah. He realizes what's happening in Eastern Europe, and he sees what's happening in America, and he establishes Hatzolah. Not the Hatzolah we use today to call if we have an emergency. For him, Hatzolah meant saving the Jews of America, saving Yiddishkeit in America, saving Yiddishkeit in Israel. He was worried about the secular movements in Israel that were intent on wiping out. At that time, they didn't believe that Torah was something for the future. They felt that was something for the ghetto. And there was an attempt to wipe out Torah in Israel. And he realized that. So Hatzolah was to save the lives of Jews in Eastern Europe, to save Torah in America, and to save Torah in Eretz Israel. And he established Agudat Yisrael, the party. He felt there should be a political voice. And he established Chinuch Hatzmai, there should be a system of education in Israel. There he is in Lakewood, New Jersey, building Torah in Eretz Israel, building Torah in America. And many of him think of him as an extremist. I think of him as a purist. He was uncompromising and felt that in America you need to have a yeshiva just as it was in Sletsk, no different. And he transplanted the yeshiva from Sletsk to Lakewood. Whereas the Rav, Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik, believed to use more the method of Rabbi Shmuel Hirsch and to engage the minds of American intellects by using modernity. Aaron Kotler would have none of that. The minds of American young people will come to be engaged in Torah if you keep the Torah pure. And he kept it 100% pure. And for decades, it was a small yeshiva in Lakewood. It's only recently, if you go to Lakewood now, it's a metropolis. It's built into a massive city of hundreds and hundreds of yeshivas and institutions, and Lakewood is bursting at the seams with thousands and thousands of Talmudim. And you see that even the other yeshivas, even the modern Orthodox yeshivas, Yeshiva University, has moved to the right much more to Rabbi Aaron Kotler's approach than it used to be. In the long run, in the short term, everybody thought he was crazy, that he was a dinosaur from the past. Not everybody, the leaders knew. He was a confidant of the Chofetz Chaim. He was a confidant of Reb Chaim Ozer Grudzinski. They used to ask him advice. This is who Rabbi Aaron Kotler was. And in Eretz Israel, they asked him advice. He was one of the leaders of the Jewish people. Unbelievable mind. One of his friends in yeshiva said, "I'm not jealous of his mind. I'm not jealous of his memory. I'm jealous of his physical strength." That he can go for days without eating and sleeping because he forgets to eat and sleep. He's just learning. He literally used to forget to eat and sleep and go for days. This person said, that's what I'm jealous of, to be able to do that. So although he was such a genius, he worked like crazy. He was a masmid. He worked so hard and did all these other things of chesed in order to save world Jewry. So this is Rabbi Aaron Kotler, an absolute giant. My father, I remember, went to visit Lakewood for the first time. It was still a small yeshiva. And he said for the first time since the war, he can see Torah being reestablished as it was in Lithuania. That all the yeshivas in Israel, he never saw it, and the yeshivas in America, he never saw it. He saw it in Lakewood. He said, this is a yeshiva on the style of the Lithuanian yeshivas of Eretz Israel, and that's what his intention was. That was Rabbi Aaron Kotler's intention. Anyway, what Rabbi Aaron Kotler says here is quite amazing, and a piece in the Dorim. And he says, what it means, what Rabbi Meir means when he says מכלל לאו אתה שומע הן, is דכל היכא דאיתלן דשומעים את הלאו מכלל הן, חשיבה שמיעת הצד השני לדיבור ממש. What Rabbi Meir is saying is an implication is not an implication. An implication is words. There are two ways you can say something. You can say something with words, and you can say something with the spaces between the words. And when you're saying something with the spaces between the words, that's still communication. As an orator, a public speaker will know, sometimes you pause for a few moments and there's silence to emphasize what you've just said or to prepare them for what's about to come. That pause is communication. That's part of talking. That's how one talks. The way one emphasizes words, the silence is also part of it. So an implication, explains Rabbi Aaron, is not an implication. You implied. No, I didn't imply. I actually said, but you didn't use words. I didn't have to use words. You don't have to always use words. If the implication is clear, you've got an implication. And therefore, when the Torah says, with the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, you've got to say the converse as well, says Rabbi Aaron Kotler. Why do you have to say the converse? If an implication is words, why do you have to repeat the words? If I say, if you fight with the Jewish people, you'll get Gilad, that means I've also said, if you don't fight, you won't get Gilad. Now, why does Moshe still have to repeat that as well? So you see that in the laws of Tanaim, of conditions, we don't say מכלל לאו אתה שומע הן, we don't use implications. Yes, generally an implication is a statement, but in laws of conditions in contracts, an implication is not a statement. You've actually got to spell it out. That's what Rabbi Kotler says. So struggled a little bit to understand. So why is that so? What is the difference? And I believe the difference is the fragmentability of mominus. Because money, it's not clear. If I say to you, if it rains tomorrow, I will give you $1,000. What does it mean? And if it doesn't rain, what have I said? I'll give you nothing? Maybe I said I'll give you $80 or $500 or $200. Who knows what I meant? So the Torah says when you're dealing with something that's fragmentable, and you don't know what the converse is. All you know is if it this, then that. And if not this, well, it could be a range of things. There you've got to specify it. But in Isurim, it's yes or no. It's black or white. So therefore, the implication is valid. The implication is clear. And that we had in the Tosfos in Ksubas that we brought in that shir in Gittin, where the Tosfos says that if it weren't for T'nai b'nei Gad and b'nei Reuven, I might have thought you can't use a T'nai at all in Mamonot. Why not? Because a T'nai is not clear. What do you really want to do? If I say, I'm giving you my house, that's clear. If I say, I'm giving you my house on condition and I lay out a whole lot of conditions, now you need lawyers to interpret it. I might have thought that's not valid. Comes Moshe to teach us in the Torah, no, you can make a condition, provided the condition is absolutely clear. If this, then that. If not, then this. And there's no place for fragmentation and for interpretation. So what would happen in a case where you're making a condition, but it is black and white? For example, in the case of Sukkot, when I give you a lulav to use, and I say it's on condition you give it back to me, does it have to be a Tanai Kaful? Some Sefer says, no, it doesn't have to be a Tanai Kaful. We learned a Rosh that brought the Bali Ha'itu. You don't even have to make the condition, because it's so clear that it's conditional. It's so obvious that it's conditional. And it's a yes or no. I'm giving you the lulav. Clearly, I still want to bench lulav after you. Clearly, I still want a lulav tomorrow. So there's no question. You can see from my action that there's an implied condition. So we're using implied conditions, even though we're talking about conditions. Yes, because that's black and white. There's nothing fragmented. I'm not saying you can have my lulav and esrog as long as you give it back to me. And if you don't give it back to me, you can have half my lulav. We're not saying that. It's either yes or no. So when it's an either yes or no, such as in Isurim, there we don't need a T'nai Kaful. We can use implications. Where there's place for interpretation, there's this wide spectrum of gray, because mominus can be fragmented into small units. There you've got to be very specific, and we don't rely on implications. And what we see from here is the importance of implications. Rabbi Kotler writes, there's a beautiful piece at the beginning of Nedorim in his Sefer that they published, where he talks about how much we learn from Masechta Nedorim about the power of speech. And here in Shavuos, we can learn today the power of implications. That other than in the case of mominus, for reasons that we've said, just when one talks, realize what you're implying is part of what you said. Never say to someone, somebody said, but you implied such and such, and then you say, but I didn't say that. That's not a valid answer. Yes, you did say that. If it's implied, if it can be implied from what you've said or from what you've written, then you said it. And so we have to be careful when we're writing emails, when we put a post on social media and we make comments. Don't only know, am I happy with what I've written? Am I willing to stand behind what I've written? What are the potential implications of what I've written? What could people think? How could people extrapolate what I've written? What conclusions could they reach? And am I okay with that as well? Am I willing to stand behind that as well? Because what we imply is also a statement, and we have to be careful not only of what our words say, but also what our words imply. Even if we haven't actually said it, it has the power of words.